Through the flickering light, a huge custom-made prison chair came into view, crisscrossed with countless mechanisms. Welded to it was a figure, eyes closed, yet radiating a stately, almost regal aura. This is holy crap. As Yhwach drew closer, the prisoner in the chair slowly lifted his head. Every voice in the vault burst out at once. Aizen! He's back to his old self, the one who controls everything. That damn Aizen is back! Although Aizen was sealed from head to toe with only his left eye exposed, he sat with the same arrogant poise as ever. He did not look like a disgraced prisoner. He looked like a sealed great demon king. His mere presence made people want to bow. Even veteran leaders, Yoriichi, Kisuke Urahara, Isshin Kurosaki, felt the air tighten around them. Gazing at him, they all thought the same thing. Aizen Sosuke, even in a prison chair, he sits like a king. Tesai Tsukabashi's dark forehead beaded with cold sweat. As the Soul Society's sole great Taoist for nearly a century, Tesai had personally participated in countless large-scale sealing operations. He had never seen anything like this. Aizen wasn't just bound by the usual lock and sleep. Every spiritual node, every spirit point, had been sealed. He could barely use any spiritual power. This was the most rigorous confinement Tesai had ever witnessed, worthy of the punishment of 20,000 years he had once joked about at the start of the Aizen files. Urahara's intuition told him that Ichigo must have won the Transcendence battle earlier. That should have been cause for celebration. Instead, seeing Aizen return to his original, composed Shinigami form, with that confident, calculating eye, set every nerve in Urahara's body on edge. The Hogyoku evolved Aizen had been dangerously powerful, but had abandoned cunning for raw force. An enemy without strategy is frightening in one way. An enemy who combines overwhelming strength with ruthless intellect is a nightmare. As Yhwach approached, the soul-exposed eye reflected his figure. The corners of Aizen's sealed mouth curled into a faint, amused arc. He showed no visible reaction to the supreme pressure Yhwach radiated. If anything, he looked on the meeting like an observer inspecting a curious insect. To Aizen, the legendary Quincy King seemed only a man, if that. Yhwach stopped before the chair. Calm, collected, he spoke like an equal to an equal. "It seems you know why I'm here," he said, voice low and steady. "I need you, Aizen Sosuke. Join me as one of my special war powers. Serve under my command." There was a sincerity in his words that everyone could feel. As the words played across the archive, the Soul Society shuddered. Shouts and murmurs rippled through the ranks. Did Yhwach really go down to Muken and offer Aizen a place in the Wandenreich? He said, "Under my command," but his tone implies partnership. Aizen and Yhwach, the two greatest evils in history, working together? Old grudges turned to outright panic. Two figures who should have been enemies of the Soul Society, meeting in hell and negotiating, suggested the darkest of possibilities. One had returned as a king after 1,000 years of sleep. The other had covertly manipulated the Gotei for centuries and just recently unleashed havoc in the future. If they allied, the Soul Society would face an unprecedented nightfall. The captains of the First Division were among the most shaken, especially the captain commander. At the sight of Aizen and Yhwach together, his chiseled face went so pale it seemed to drain. "Bastard," he muttered, and slammed his wooden staff into the floor. The strike left a massive crater. "Please calm yourself, Captain Commander. Watch your health." Chojiro Sasebe bowed anxiously beside him, fearing for the old man's heart. Kyoraku Shunsui hesitated, then forced out a thought that had been gnawing at him. "Is it possible the First Division had no one on guard?" he asked, voice tight with dread. Komamura Sajin bristled. Even if the guards were slaughtered, the captain commander himself was supposed to be the strongest shield. How could he be absent? Kyoraku swallowed and reminded them all of the earlier archive footage, the battle between Yhwach and the captain commander in the outer court. "If my memory's right," Kyoraku continued, "that battle took place in the outer court, not near Squad 1's barracks. So either the captain commander was defeated first, leaving the First Division unguarded so Yhwach could boldly enter Muken, or the meeting in Muken happened before that battle, which raises the question, why was the captain commander not guarding the division?" He paused, breathless, as if summoning the courage to say what every face in the room already feared. "Or," he added slowly, each word falling like a stone, Both things happened at once. The meeting with Aizen and Mukin and the battle in the outer court. They occurred simultaneously. The implication hit everyone like a blow. Kyoraku let the silence spread and then delivered the cruel, unbearable truth. The Captain Commander fell in that battle. That Yhwach who fought the Captain Commander, he might have been a fake. His real goal was probably to trick the Captain Commander into revealing his Bankai, Zanka no Tachi, Blade of Ember. When Kyoraku Shunsui voiced his suspicion, the captains fell silent, stunned. Their faces showed panic and confusion. What had once been the grim satisfaction of watching Yhwach destroyed by the Captain Commander now turned to disbelief. Kyoraku Shunsui, someone began. Although I want to deny it, your reasoning is airtight. Nemu Kurotsuchi said beneath his blue and white mask, his eyes heavy and his expression unsettled. Given Yhwach's ruthlessness and his goal to replace the Soul King, it's entirely possible he used a substitute to fight the Captain Commander, just to eliminate threats. You mean, another captain prompted. After tricking the Captain Commander into revealing his Bankai, he must have some way to seal or even steal it. Nemu's voice was blunt. Steal a Bankai? The captains' faces went pale. A Bankai was a Shinigami's greatest trump card and the most reliable way to counter a foe. To strip a captain of his Bankai was not merely an exchange of advantage, it could break their fighting spirit and reverse the tide of any battle. A fight that should have been won could suddenly be lost. Kyoraku sighed and picked up the thread. Now you see why I used that absurd title. Vice Captain, he murmured. He bowed his head, unable to look at the Captain Commander's face. As the beloved disciple of the stoic old man, he knew how deeply the Captain Commander's once unshakable resolve had been rattled by the future clips that had emerged. The mood in the room turned heavy. Every captain lowered their head, feeling the weight of insult and injury. By linking the previously revealed footage with the new clips, the future's timeline became chillingly clear. After the imposter, killed by the Heaven and Earth Ash, was destroyed, the real Yhwach emerged from hell, stripped Zanka no Tachi of its Bankai, and defeated the Captain Commander. That explained why Yhwach appeared in the Soul King Palace. Everything pointed to one conclusion. The Captain Commander had fallen into a trap. The video cut to a scene in the dimness of hell. Two malevolent figures faced one another. The frame showed Yhwach. The camera shifted, drawing a parallel angle that also captured Aizen sealed in the chair. The close-up made Aizen's presence, even imprisoned, feel enormous. That's right, Yhwach said in a low voice. To destroy the Soul Society, on that we agree. Aizen, only able to move his eyes, lifted them slightly. A faint, disdainful smile lingered on his lips. Then came his reply, and the entire Gotei 13 exhaled with relief as one. Refuse. His gaze was cold, absolute, no room for negotiation. Even restrained in the prisoner's chair and plainly at a disadvantage, Aizen's tone pushed everyone away, his resolve sharp and without hesitation. The pureblood Quincy watching in Silver Frame City reacted with fury. Damn it, they spat. Aizen Sosuke, how dare he be so arrogant, even as a prisoner? Inside the Ice Crystal Palace, Stern Ritter and hundreds of thousands of guards stomped in offended anger. Aizen had not mocked them outright, nor called them names. He only refused. Yet that refusal, that air of contempt, felt like an insult to their very existence. They imagined Aizen not imprisoned, but seated above them, looking down. Yhwach, taken aback, frowned. What? His displeasure showed. He had expected submission or at least interest. Instead, Aizen had rejected him. Aizen Sosuke, this is the answer you give. He tried to press on, refusing to concede, but the camera held on Aizen, unmoved, eyes cold as winter. For a long minute there was silence. Finally, Yhwach turned away with a sneer. Shh, the meeting is over. The clip ignited reactions everywhere. So cool, some breathed. With a single look, Lord Aizen forced the Quincy King to retreat. The contrast in demeanor is obvious. Aizen stood like a ruler. Yhwach looked humbled. In Las Noches, the Arrancar watched the clip and felt vindicated. To them, Quincy were the truest enemy. A Quincy's death was absolute, no chance of reincarnation. Compared to Shinigami, who could be purified and reborn, Quincy denied the cycle of souls entirely. The arrogance of Squad Zero had already enraged many, and now seeing Aizen put the Quincy King in his place, those resentments turned into fervent admiration. If Aizen's essence was like a Menos Grande to them, then he had asserted dominance even over the Quincy. Aizen sat on the throne in Las Noches, idly swirling his wine. Whether in the future footage or the present, his posture was imperious and luminous. "I did not expect Yhwach to seek me out," he said, lips curving into a dangerously charming smile. But fortunately, his voice dripped with confidence and hostility. "Even my future self made the same choice I do now." He looked at Yhwach with thin disdain. "Since our paths run in the same direction, the less time we spend together, the better. He is an opponent who must be eliminated sooner or later." The final clip faded as Yhwach disappeared into the blackness. The first direct confrontation between two kings of their respective factions ended with Yhwach at a disadvantage. In the shop where the footage had been paused, everyone wore complicated expressions. "Truly worthy of Aizen," someone murmured. If he had accepted Yhwach's offer easily, he wouldn't have been the mastermind who played the Gotei 13 so completely. Kurosaki Isshin wasn't surprised by the outcome. To him, it felt only natural. If it hadn't been for that inventory video being exposed, outsiders would never have known the extent of what Aizen had done behind the scenes. It was precisely that comprehensive revelation, showing both past and future, that let the world see this morally ambiguous man more clearly and realize that he would never bow his proud head to anyone. "Heh," Yoruichi said with a smirk. "Even if Yhwach wants to vent his anger, he won't be able to touch Aizen for a while, right?" Although the video didn't include every word, Yhwach's decisive turn made it clear he didn't want to waste too much time on Aizen. After all, the imposter outside was still stalling. If anything went wrong, the scheme to fool Bankai would collapse. Yes, after merging with the Hogyoku, Aizen is theoretically immortal. Yhwach would indeed have a very hard time killing him. Urahara Kisuke said as he fanned himself, then added, "Also, I suppose the reason Aizen became a special war power is his spiritual pressure," he continued. "Spiritual pressure? What do you mean?" everyone asked, surprised. "Aizen isn't sealed, is he? Logically, his spiritual pressure should have stopped progressing," someone said. "No." Urahara shook his head and replied with a confident tone, "You're overthinking it. Aizen has never stopped getting stronger. Even during his seal, his spiritual pressure kept increasing. I even feel it's stronger than it was at the Karakura town battle." When Urahara made that deduction, he himself felt stunned, but that was what the footage suggested. He firmly believed the comparison. Everyone around him reacted with shock. Impossible! Even if all his spiritual points are sealed, his spiritual pressure inside keeps growing? That's abnormal. They all went cold. Spiritual pressure is the essence of combat. Whether it's a simple strike or a complex, rule-based ability, it ultimately depends on how strong the spiritual pressure is. With enough pressure, even an apparently ordinary sword swing can have the force to tear mountains apart. Aizen, after his fourth evolution with the Hoku, had shown that perfectly. If his spiritual pressure could truly increase without limit, then, even if the 1,000-year blood war erupted, Aizen could continue growing stronger. Just thinking of that made everyone's scalps prickle and their backs break out in cold sweat. Urahara's next conjecture made their fear spike. Everyone. Under his fisherman's hat, Urahara's eyes scanned the room. After a quick look, he asked, "You probably think that while he was sealed, Aizen couldn't use any spiritual power, right? Otherwise?" Yoruichi spread her hands and responded with a bored expression. "His spiritual points are locked and he's lost his Zanpakuto Kyoka Suigetsu. He's going to rely on one eye to trigger 5-sense hypnosis?" She rolled her Byakugan with a flourish, refusing to believe that a mere glance could do anything. "Aha! Miss Yoruichi, you really are something. You guessed it," Urahara teased. "What? Urahara Kisuke, explain yourself. What do you mean?" Kurosaki Isshin demanded, shocked. "Are you saying Aizen subtly hypnotized Yhwach during their conversation?" The room froze. With what they knew of Urahara, they trusted his words, but the idea that Aizen, sealed and reliant on one exposed eye, had interfered was terrifying. The Quincy King had been the only one able to face the Captain Commander. If Aizen could affect him even in that state, the implications were staggering. Originally, they'd thought that imprisoning Aizen had removed the threat from the world. Now it seemed that, by revealing a single eye, he still exerted an oppressive, suffocating pressure. "Didn't you feel it?" Urahara went on, rubbing his temple. When Aizen and Yhwach were talking, there was still that familiar feeling, like being in an illusion. I'm only guessing, but I'm sure that during that brief conversation, Aizen must have played a small trick and interfered with Yhwach's perception. The statement silenced the room. Every face showed astonishment and a cold dread. Even imprisoned, Aizen remained dangerously powerful. If his seals were ever removed, his spiritual pressure could crush everything. Tessai Tsukabashi wiped his forehead, forcing a smile to steady the others. Fortunately, Aizen's imprisonment is permanent. If even Yhwach couldn't do anything to him, then Aizen's role should be finished, right? In Tessai's view, no matter how strong Aizen had become, he was immobile. Spiritual pressure without action would be like a nailed-in stake, useless. Unless someone deliberately released him and brought Aizen back to the surface to intervene in the thousand-year blood war, there'd be no chance for him to display that power. Who would deliberately release Aizen? Tessai muttered, though he didn't expect anyone would be so foolish. His voice had hardly left him when the interrupted footage resumed. Footsteps sounded and the camera picture cleared. Each step echoed, thump, thump, thump. A figure in a pink floral robe came into view. Is that Kyoraku Shunsui? Everyone recognized him at once. The man in the footage had already become Vice Captain Kyoraku Shunsui. Kyoraku, what is he doing? This place, it's still hell. As they watched more closely, their eyes widened. He wouldn't be planning to release Aizen, would he? Compared to the general store, the first division erupted into chaos. What's going on? Captain Kyoraku, why is he walking toward the depths of hell? The captain's faces changed as they stared toward the frozen figure of Kyoraku Shunsui in the left column. No way, he wasn't actually going to release Aizen, was he? That man had been nailed in hell. Why would he be freed again? What could Kyoraku's reason be, and who would allow it? Suddenly, the atmosphere turned tense. Gazes toward Kyoraku grew suspicious and wary. No one knew what the future might bring. Author's note: the line I omitted from the Yuha Aizen conversation in the official Yuku anime was, "I am the Quincy King who cannot follow in the Shinigami's footsteps." My original intent was to become Yuha's subordinate, which lacked gravitas. I don't care which translation you've seen, this line isn't in the original manga, it was added for the anime. I accept only the official version. Thank you. Chapter 169, We Can Only Beg Aizen. Chapter 184, Section 184. What if, at that time, Kyoraku Shunsui had also rebelled? Wouldn't that make him a complete mole? The thought that the vice captain of the Gotei 13 might be secretly colluding with Aizen hung in the air like a poison. The atmosphere in the captain's office felt as if the air had been sucked out, stifling and suffocating. Kyoraku finally broke the dead silence, scratching the back of his head. He looked almost on the verge of tears. Everyone, please don't look at me like that. I'm really not a traitor. Damn it. I was the one enjoying the drama about those two villains meeting. How did I end up the suspect? Even if they didn't trust me, they should at least trust the footage that had already been exposed. In the Karakura town battle, I, Shunsui, had done my part. When things happened, I stepped up. Wasn't that proof enough? But no one paid attention to his inner protestations. The suspicious looks only intensified. Nemu Kurotsuchi sneered, her voice cutting through the room. Kyoraku Shunsui, other captains might not know, but I can clearly see what you're holding is the key box that can unlock the sealing mechanism in hell. How do you explain this? The keys inside the box rattled, a tiny, damning sound. Facing the interrogation, Shunsui had no good answer. Sweat beaded on his forehead as anxiety made him at a loss for words. When the captain commander, standing at the head of the line, lifted his eyelids and fixed Shunsui with a stern stare, Kyoraku felt the pressure close in. "Old man, please hear me out," he said with a forced, bitter smile, scrambling for a defense. Then, suddenly, "Rumble!" On the playback screen, the image trembled violently. The dark, quiet footage shook as if gripped by a quake. The abrupt change cut off the questioning immediately. Every captain in the room felt their hearts lurch. It was as if something vital deep in their souls had been snatched away. "What's going on?" someone shouted. "Even a place as deep as hell is being affected. What's happening outside?" This time, it wasn't only the captains who looked alarmed. The Captain Commander's face betrayed deep unease. He had lived through the long history of the Soul Society, the rise and fall of the Gotei 13, and yet he had never seen anything like this. What force could shake the very foundations of the Soul Society? Such a tremor could only mean a world-ending catastrophe. On the screen, under the brim of his dark straw hat, the future Kyoraku's voice sounded weary and small. It's shaking again. Even hell is affected. It seems the Soul Society is nearing its end. The camera cut to his face, showing the same worry that filled those watching. At that sight, the murmurs of suspicion directed at Kyoraku finally died away. No one doubted his allegiance anymore. But another revelation on the tape froze everyone with fresh horror. He turned his head, staring into the depths of hell, and spoke aloud as if to someone unseen. We, who are innocent, can only stop here. We are not allowed to step into the deepest darkness. But I guess you can still hear my voice, right? Aizen Sosuke. The captain's expressions went slack. Could it be? Had Kyoraku really intended to release Aizen? Had the future been so desperate that the Soul Society would need Aizen's power to survive? The memory of the exposed clips from Karakura Town, the wounds they'd suffered at Aizen's hands, stung all over again. The idea that the very man who had betrayed and nearly destroyed them might be their last hope was devastatingly ironic. Silence fell like a shroud over the Seirete. Every Shinigami in the Gotei 13 felt hollowed out by the cruelty of that possibility. They could not have imagined events taking such a turn. On the video, Kyoraku peered into the abyss, then opened the key box. Under the captain's burning gaze, he drew out a single key and spoke, his voice low and steady toward the darkness. Aizen, since you cannot respond with your voice, then let me first undo the seal on your mouth. The camera zoomed in, focusing on the edge of the darkness, on one of the upper holes among the rows of barrier keyholes. A chill went through the room. No way, someone whispered. We've already seen that we may have to rely on Aizen. Even watching him seal being undone is unbearable. They stood there, flushed and mortified, as Kyoraku's hand guided the key toward the hole. Each inch it moved felt like a blow. They could not stop him. Click. When the key slid home and the mechanism released, a sound reverberated through the Seirete, like 1,000 small cracks in everyone's heart. Only one segment of the seal had been undone, but it was a crushing humiliation that trampled on every Shinigami's pride. It was worse than death for some. This is finally undone, Kyoraku murmured, looking into the empty, bottomless dark with a complicated expression. Aizen, this way, even without spiritual pressure, you can still communicate with me. He paused, and a fragile hope touched his voice. If someone's mouth had been sealed for 2 years, it would be hard for them to speak at first. But I imagine for you, that shouldn't be the case, right? His one visible eye shone with desperate expectation as the scene on the screen hung between them, hope and dread braided together. He no longer cared about right or wrong. Violence for violence, fighting evil with evil, was all that mattered to him now. Still, the expected sound never came. Instead came the steady approach of footsteps. In the dim light, as if born from the darkness itself, a noble figure emerged. Aizen Sosuke, the man sentenced for 20,000 years, had, of his own volition, unsealed himself. He stepped toward the camera. The whole Seirete exploded into chaos. The footage filled every captain's quarters and squad office. There, in the faint light, was Aizen, bound in black restraints from head to toe, yet moving with utter composure as he strode through the gloom. Every member of the Gotei 13 felt a humiliation and despair they had never known. Bastard. This old man has lived over 2,000 years, and I've never seen anything so absurd. If he lives to see more days after this, I will not allow such a humiliation to stand. The Captain Commander's white beard bristled. His eyes burned, and the normally loose Captain Commander uniform whipped in the sudden gust of red spiritual pressure. The squad office, barely repaired, began to smolder and explode again. Wood splintered and dust filled the air. The Captain Commander was furious. Aizen had been sentenced to 20,000 years, the harshest judgment in Soul Society's history. It was proof of the monstrous crimes Aizen had committed. Worse, the review video had shown how, on the Karakura Town battlefield, the reappearance of the ceiling flames had forced the Captain Commander to use Ito Kaso, costing him an arm when he fought the fake Yhwach. In other words, after the Thousand-Year Blood War, Aizen had been largely responsible for the Captain Commander's steep decline in strength and had pushed the whole Gotei 13 to the edge. And yet, after all that, they still had to ask Aizen for help. A successor had personally released him. The irony crushed the Captain Commander. Beyond grief and rage, he would rather descend to hell himself than witness this. At that moment, he felt worse than when he had learned he'd been defeated by Yhwach. Around him came not only unbearable heat, but a wave of despair that threatened to shatter every Shinigami's faith. Shunsui, look at the mess you've made. You're going to make the old man pass out. Jushiro Ukitake poked Kyoraku Shunsui's arm sharply, glaring. Ukitake, what can I do? I'm helpless too, Shunsui said, speechless. It had happened in the future. How could the present Shunsui be blamed? All anyone could do was stare at the screen. No amount of rising blood pressure could change it. All the captains could do was widen their eyes as Aizen's silhouette fully emerged from the dark. And then his voice reached them, cool and unruffled, and every syllable grated on the Shinigami's nerves. What's wrong? When the footsteps neared, Shunsui staggered beneath his floral haori, nearly toppling backward. He kept balance only by grabbing the furniture. Aizen had already taken his elegant steps and looked down from above, his exposed left eye lowered at a faint angle. Kyoraku Shunsui, why are you just standing there? Don't you still have 2 keys you can use? Aizen's tone was as calm as always, no explicit threats, no forced emphasis. But to the Gotei 13, it sounded like a command. The review camera faced him directly, capturing that familiar, cold, composed expression that had haunted their nightmares, sending a pressure that struck deep into their hearts. Damn it! Tushiro Hitsugaya exploded first. He had been the captain most often cut down by Aizen's blade in the footage, reduced to a toy of Aizen's. Earlier, when the transparent screen repaired and showed Aizen in the prison chair, Hitsugaya had finally had a moment to vent the anger he'd held back, until Aizen was released so quickly. The reversal made him look foolish. Kyoraku Shunsui, the captain commander, snapped, fury finally overtaking him. After Aizen's review is over, you can go to hell and reflect for a week. He had had enough of Aizen's condescension. You like going to hell, don't you? Then stay there. Shunsui had no words. The corners of his stubbled mouth twitched. I truly am suffering an undeserved calamity. Far away, in Las Noches, Ichimaru Gin was no less stunned. Bent over the blood-stained throne, he stared wide-eyed at the reversed scene. In the original timeline, his untimely death had prevented him from participating in the Thousand-Year Blood War. He hadn't known that Seirete had nearly collapsed. Now, seeing it through the review and feeling the tremors coming off the footage, Ichimaru's mind was shaken. What stunned him even more was that Aizen, the man he had spent 100 years undercover for, the man whose plans he had supported and even sacrificed for, was about to be released by the Gotei 13. Gin felt sick with disbelief. Had all his sacrifices been for nothing? Gotei 13. Kyoraku Shunsui. Did they ever consider his feelings? Didn't he, Jin, have any pride? Everything he'd gambled was for nothing. How could he bear it? He forced himself to look up at Aizen's image and muttered, half mocking, half pleading, Captain Aizen, is it still too late for me to apologize now? Chapter 171, The 800-Hearted Deception. In the real world, no one's reactions could change the staged conversation on the playback. Aizen, you must really want to escape hell, don't you? Under Aizen's unblinking gaze, Kyoraku Shunsui produced 2 more keys. He unsealed Aizen's left eye and his ankles. Along with the unsealed mouth, that made 3 spiritual seals released. The act once again drew the Captain Commander's murderous stare. Kyoraku Shunsui, why don't you just remove all of Aizen's restraints? The old man snapped, an angry snort escaping him. His ancient eyes looked ready to kill. He was barely restraining himself from grabbing his wooden staff and smacking Kyoraku on the head. Being scolded pointlessly, Kyoraku looked put out and bitter. With his centuries of life, he was usually a jovial middle-aged rake, but faced with the Captain Commander's rant, he transformed into a sulky child denied candy. The sight softened the tense atmosphere in the squad room a little. In the recording, Aizen answered coolly, I never said I wanted to be released. His cold, emotionless tone and downward glance ignited fury among the Shinigami watching. Damn it! He takes advantage and still acts arrogant? How can he talk like that? Who recommended him? How could Captain Kyoraku have vouched for him? It's obvious they can't suppress Aizen's presence. A wave of resentment spread through the Seirete. Aizen Sosuke, he was insufferably arrogant, and our vice captain, useless. Kyoraku merely chuckled and adjusted his straw hat. Would someone who didn't want to leave here say there are 2 keys left unused? He asked with habitual nonchalance. Aizen's next line froze faces across the Seirete and stunned those watching elsewhere as well. He replied faintly, would someone who didn't want to be released hide a key inside their body when they came to see someone they didn't want released? The camera on the playback suddenly cut to Kyoraku's chest, lingering over his heart. No way. The First Division's captains turned in astonishment. Their eyes followed the camera to Kyoraku's bare chest. Captain Kyoraku, you wouldn't really embed the key to hell in your own heart, would you? They were shocked. If this scene hadn't been exposed, no one would have known Kyoraku was callous enough to self-mutilate for the cause. Kyoraku took in his colleagues' reactions, shook his head, let out a rueful laugh, and seized the moment with a bit of flattery. That's exactly why the post of Captain Commander still belongs to the old man, he said. Only he can keep Aizen in check. The Captain Commander's chiseled face remained stern, though the anger on it had softened. He didn't believe the Gotei 13 had been cowed by Aizen. Aizen was the architect of his own downfall. If not for his trap, none of this would have happened. Under the camera's close scrutiny, Kyoraku slowly opened his Shinigami coat to reveal a hairy chest and a cross-shaped scar over his heart. He spoke in a weary, resigned voice. They insisted I hide the key to hell in my heart. It was the condition for entering hell and unsealing your 3 restraints. I was only following orders. Aizen watched and mocked it all in his usual detached way. So that's it. If I killed you, the gate to hell would be sealed forever, right? They must have thought I'd kill you to take the key. A faint, superior smile curled his lips. Those people of Central 46, they're as foolish as ever. Another public humiliation. Even after destroying the former Central 46, even as a prisoner, Aizen still held those decrepit pseudo-sages in contempt. The Soul Reaper captains kept their silence. Clearly, they shared his distaste. Kyoraku gave a bitter laugh. Everything is for the Soul Society, he said, then stepped aside. The camera swung behind him and revealed what had been hidden. Another large, custom-made prison chair? A seemingly ordinary white chair sat there, but its design was intricately tailored. The captains frowned. In the present, inside Urahara's shop, Tsukabashi Tesai swore under his breath. No way. They planned to send Aizen to the surface. They even made something like this. Tsukabashi was stunned. Not long ago, he would have assumed no one would be foolish enough to release Aizen and let him return to the surface, but here were the Gotei 13 themselves doing exactly that. It was outrageous. Then something even more startling happened. One of the executive militia stepped forward without permission and reached toward Aizen. Instantly his hands were gone, only bloody stumps remained. The sight was grotesque. Aizen hadn't touched him. Simply by emanating his presence, his aura had severed the man's wrists. Everyone watching the playback broke into a cold sweat. Urahara Kisuke's earlier suspicion hardened into certainty. I was right, he muttered. Section 187. During the 2 years I was imprisoned, Aizen's spiritual pressure has grown to an unprecedented level. I can't wait to see what he does in the 1,000-year blood war. Inside the First Division, the footage played on. Even the elite executive militia recoiled, hands disappearing under Aizen's unbearably dense reiatsu. It was a bizarre, terrifying sight. All the captains, including the captain commander, stared in stunned silence. His spiritual pressure, it's even stronger than before, someone breathed. It has reached a transcendent level even I cannot attain, the captain commander said reluctantly, his heavy brow furrowing. As the strongest Shinigami in 1,000 years, he knew the weight of his words. He also knew how much saying them would hurt morale, but with the tremors rocking Soul Society, the old man had already realized the danger went far beyond the Seirete. The safety of the 3 realms itself was at stake. And there was only one thing that could send that kind of shock through the Soul Society: the Soul King. You've already figured out the cause of that tremor, haven't you? Nemu Kurotsuchi asked, lifting his eyelids just enough to show a half smile. From Kyoraku Shunsui's grim prognosis, the Soul Society is heading toward its end, and his own knowledge, he had pieced together a chilling truth. The Captain Commander remained silent, but his glance toward Nemu was heavy with implication. The hint was clear. Nemu should speak. He laughed softly. Since I have permission, I will lay out the awful truth I've deduced, the truth everyone dreads. His fingernails curled. His eyes glinted as he spoke in a voice that sent a chill through the room. First, the massive tremor affecting the Soul Society. It was caused by the death of the Soul King. The bombshell stunned the captains into silence. They were struck numb, unable even to shout. The Soul King? Dead? Kuchiki Byakuya said, visibly shaken. As head of the Kuchiki house and a keeper of ancient texts, he knew the old histories. The Soul King had been dismembered by the ancestors of the 5 great noble families and reduced to a stabilizing torso, the wedge holding the 3 realms together. Without that central wedge, the human world, Hueco Mundo, and the Soul Society would collapse. The Soul King is dead, Byakuya whispered. If Nemu hadn't reminded him, he might never have drawn the connection in time. Doesn't that mean Yhwach won their battle? Jushiro Ukitake asked in disbelief. Even the Zero Squad's leader couldn't stop Yhwach? The implication was devastating. Nemu shrugged, speaking with cold indifference. The answer is obvious. Given Yhwach's nature, I suspect he did not merely kill the Soul King. What do you mean? The captains leaned forward as if the question itself might change the answer. To completely supplant the Soul King, a safer method would be to devour him. The words echoed like a dirge. Devouring the Soul King, if true, meant Yhwach would gain Soul King-level power. That revelation made the captains finally understand why Shunsui had been so desperate to prepare. To face an enemy with the authority of a Soul King across the 3 realms, only the very top could stand a chance. Aizen, Kurosaki Ichigo, and perhaps one other. The list of possible saviors was painfully short. Beyond the destruction of the Seirete, Nemu added with a tilt of his head, I am curious to see what strange phenomena appear once the Soul King is devoured. At that moment, the recap feed seemed to answer him. The camera cut. The scene changed. The view opened on a dark, endless sky. From it poured a torrent of Reiatsu like a black flood. Within that oozing river were creatures, twisting, hateful things that looked like monstrous tadpoles or squirming venom. Even the seasoned captains felt their scalps prickle and cold sweat bead at their temples. What are those things? Someone hissed. Could this be the Soul King's power leaking? Another wondered aloud. The explanation left them swallowing hard. The flood was everywhere. As the camera scanned, it revealed the soul-concealing membrane itself turned pitch black. The river of darkness threatened to engulf the Soul Society. Even worse, during the sweep, the captains saw their own comrades, Sui Feng, Kuchiki Byakuya, Hisagi, Ikaku Madarame, Abarai Renji, Yumichika Ayasagawa, each struggling amid the torrent, holding on only by the power of their Zanpakuto and Bankai. The atmosphere in the captain's hall tightened to a suffocating pressure. Using Zanpakuto power alone, Retsu Unohana murmured, her face pale, can only buy time. It's a drop against that flood, unless... She swallowed, finishing in a whisper, another Reiatsu of equal measure appears. No sooner had she spoken than a voice mocked from the dark tunnel leading to the prison, a voice thick with contempt. How ridiculous, it said. Captains of the Gotei 13, why still swing your swords so miserly? From the darkness, a massive, pristine prison chair emerged like a throne. Aizen sat in it, hands resting on the armrests, one half of his face visible and curled into a faint, disdainful smile. To deal with this, he said calmly, wouldn't it be enough to crush them all with spiritual pressure in one go? As the footage cut to Aizen seated in that throne-like chair, the BGM swelled. The captains watched, their minds racing as dread and a perverse fascination warred within them. Chapter 188, Section 188. His hands rested flat on the armrests, and a faint, indifferent smile appeared on the handsome half of his face that was visible. The pose, elegant yet undeniably dominant, was a stark contrast to the terrified, despairing looks on the faces of the captains who were struggling under the surging spiritual pressure. and to the doomed expressions across the First Division in the human world. Aizen! No way! Are we so pathetic that we have to rely on him to survive? Despair filled them. Their gazes went blank. Aizen sat there like a savior, a faint light shimmering around him, and the effect was devastating. The entire First Division, no, the entire Seirite, the whole Gotei 13, fell silent at once. The air itself in the human world felt heavy with hopelessness. It was more than a loss of breath. It degraded their very souls. Aizen remained calm. With a single dismissive word, ridiculous, he trampled their dignity again and again. Even the captain commander could not hold on. His aged body faltered. He nearly fainted on the spot. He had hated Aizen deeply over the years, but now his old heart was filled with a despair unlike anything Hogyoku or Aizen had ever inflicted, a desperation that had never happened in over 2,000 years. Aizen is right. This scene is indeed quite ridiculous. Suifang's delicate body trembled. Watching the composed Aizen in the video, then glancing at the other side of the screen where their future selves stood equally shocked, her proud, aloof composure shattered. She laughed, foolish and unsteady. Toshiro Hitsugaya was left speechless. He had cursed Aizen countless times and wished for his death, but now he was mute. No words could face that man's smile. That calm, controlling smile baked despair into every Shinigami who saw it. Kyoraku Shunsui exhaled deeply. As the man responsible for Aizen's release, though he knew he had acted with a clear conscience and had not betrayed his intentions, he could not help but think if he had known his comrades would suffer this blow, he would sooner have been destroyed than allow Aizen to prevail. After all, that man had just cut them down on the Karakura battlefield, slaughter them, then turn the tide and save the world. What a script made to crush the heart. Human world, Karakura town outskirts, an abandoned warehouse. If anyone outside the captains felt injured nearly as much as them, it was the unlucky Visored. Watching Aizen's grand entrance like some messianic figure, they felt the same depth of despair. Damn it! Hiyori Saragaki cursed, slinging her slipper and hurling it at Aizen's face on the screen. The display was transparent. Her flip-flop seemed to strike true, but in reality, it slid through, leaving his expression untouched. The man they hated so much remained immaculate, seated on his prison throne, as calm as ever. I thought sealing Aizen was the perfect ending. I never thought that by the time of the 1,000-year blood war, he'd be cooperating with the Gotei 13. Hirako Shinji rubbed his temples, helpless. The Gotei 13's move made the Visored's position even more awkward. After all they had done in Karakura, now the Shinigami simply joined with Aizen without a word. Were the Visored to be nothing but tools and punching bags forever? Aizen's contrived, gentle voice and that familiar, disguised face made their teeth grind. "Long time no see, Kuchiki Rukia," he said on the screen. "Congratulations on your promotion to vice captain. It's truly wonderful that your achievements in our battle have earned you recognition." His expression had reverted to the soft, kindly smile he wore in the 5th Division, so soothing that anyone unfamiliar with him might believe his words were sincere. In Las Noches, Rukia spat a mouthful of blood. "Aizen! You bastard!" Suppressing fear and shock, she forced herself to look up at his impeccable back on the throne, helplessness filling her chest. He had tricked her into the human world with orders from Central 46, had allowed her to be captured by the Espada and dragged to Hueco Mundo, and now he made her listen to his future self's congratulatory words in front of all the Arrancar. Rukia regretted everything. She would have preferred death by Ichimaru Gin's blade. "Captain Aizen," Ichimaru Gin's voice was quiet and bitter. "Honestly, the more clips I see, the more I regret revealing myself." Seeing Aizen freed and the dark torrent about to sweep the land, and watching their former comrades still squabble over right and wrong, it left Gin speechless. No flimsy blades, no broken spears could stop the surge of the Soul King's power. They didn't have the ability. They had no shame. At Gin's words, Aizen turned slightly on his throne and glanced back for the first time since the assassination attempt. "If the Gotei 13 is like this," he said to Gin, "then it truly isn't worthy of your 100 years of effort. Also, it's a pity your future self was already killed by me 2 years before the 1,000-year blood war began. Otherwise, with Kamishini no Yari's traits, it would have shown in that war." Aizen's tone was calm, his expression unreadable. Watching the footage had subtly shifted something in him. He felt no pity for the Gotei 13, and his plans and ambitions remained unchanged. But the video had revealed a string of events that now seemed, in a way, impossible. Aizen suddenly realized that not everything is set in stone. Enmity and positions are relative. In this world, there are no eternal enemies, only changing demands and interests. He only thought that much. Aizen said no more. He turned his gaze back to the recorded footage, already calculating how he would dismantle the torrent of the Soul King's power. At the same time, urged on by Shunsui Kyoraku's coaxing, the other captains and seated officers had all fled to the research lab for shelter, leaving Aizen alone, sitting in the prisoner's chair as a stand-in. Heh. They all ran away? The Soul Reaper captains are truly heartless. Aizen's lips curved slightly. The air around the prisoner's chair and above his head was completely filled with the black torrent, leaving almost no space. Yet Aizen remained utterly calm. His posture didn't change. His handsome, unblemished face held that faint, composed smile, as if there were nothing around him, as if the sky were clear and bright because of his smile. His composure piqued the curiosity of every watcher. How would he respond? Could he dismantle the Soul King's torrent by himself? The answer came almost immediately. Hado number 90, Kurohitsugi. There was no elaborate incantation, no swell of spiritual pressure ahead of the strike. Aizen spoke casually, as if remarking on something ordinary. The single command was enough. Boom. The instant Aizen's voice fell, the darkness that filled the screen stopped. As if struck by a tremendous force from below, the torrent of the Soul King's power halted mid-fall. More strangely, the monstrous beings at the bottom, those black creatures with bloodshot, hate-filled eyes, began to reflect a dark spiritual glow, deeper than the Soul King's power, a black so deep it tipped into purple. The sky and the entire view of the video became washed in that black-purple light. The spiritual pressure erupting from the prisoner's chair pushed upward with such violence, it created an absolute vacuum behind it. Any spiritual energy caught in that zone was pulverized. The black torrent creatures were crushed and exploded the moment Kurohitsugi's barrier cube formed. Bang! 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 One explosion after another, and a vast black coffin-like barrier materialized over Seirete, severing ground from sky. Even the dome's soul-concealing membrane shattered. The black coffin pierced heaven and earth. Crimson blood spattered continuously from the crushed torrent monsters, forming a vast mist that blotted out the sky and stained the surface of the Kurohitsugi. A fine rain of blood, saturated with the Soul King's power, began to fall. Despite the apocalyptic carnage, the incantation-free Kurohitsugi quietly erased everything within its barrier. The scene, a storm of blood and unfathomable darkness, was relayed with crystal clarity to every observer through the wide-angle camera on the footage. Shock rippled through the onlookers. What? How was it that easy? In the first division, the captain's breathing stopped. As the coffin fully took shape, billions of shadow blades stabbed through it and annihilated the torrent creatures within minutes. What had seemed like a sky-crushing, bottomless darkness was wiped clean in mere minutes. The air over Seirete was purified. The sky cleared. When sunlight fell again, the Gotei 13 finally understood. Aizen had not only stopped the torrent of the Soul King's power, he had erased even the smallest dust and sand on the ground without a trace. Too strong. Staring at the screen in stunned silence, the captains, including the captain commander, reacted as one. Aizen, his Kurohitsugi, without an incantation, is even stronger than it was at the decisive battle in Karakura town. That's absurd. The Soul King's torrent and the whole of Soul Society were completely purified, and it only took a few minutes. Aizen's spiritual pressure, it's godlike. Within the first division, the captains were frozen, eyes wide, hearts pounding. Even seeing it with their own eyes felt unreal. The torrent had been the ultimate power, something even a dozen captains and their strongest seated officers together could not stop. And yet Aizen had erased it effortlessly. The sight shattered their worldviews and updated their understanding of him. He had followed through on his words. He had claimed he could crush them all at once, and he had instantly obliterated the vast torrent. Aizen had become something more monstrous than the dark creatures themselves. When the footage ended and silence settled, Shunsui Kyoraku finally broke it. Scratching the back of his head, he forced a wry smile and tried to steady his voice. Now, no one can blame me anymore, right? Aizen, he really did save Seirete. It was an odd thing to say in the first division, but after seeing what had happened, Shunsui was convinced. He even gave a silent thumbs up to his future self. The ruse of having Aizen act as a stand-in had been brilliant. Haha, rough words, but not without truth. At that moment, it was indeed Aizen who saved Seirete. If he hadn't eliminated the Soul King's torrent, whether any of you could have resisted it or what price the Gotei 13 would have paid would be irrelevant. The cost would have been heavy and bloody. Aside from Shunsui, while the other captains kept silent out of pride, Zaraki Kenpachi was the second to speak. Chapter 190, Section 190. Zaraki Kenpachi thinks in simple terms. He has no time for moral debates about good versus evil. All that matters to him is whether an opponent is strong. If they are strong, no matter their rank or allegiance, they earn his respect. Facing the future, Aizen Kenpachi's attitude is the same. Aizen is strong, incredibly strong. That alone is enough for praise. To do otherwise would be to validate Aizen's old insult when he first appeared. You are all petty people. Inside Las Noches, unlike the desolation in the Seirete, a roar of cheers rolled through the fortress like an avalanche. The shouting nearly ripped the roof off. Even the surrounding white sand sea seemed to vibrate with it. After witnessing a scene that could only be called miraculous, even the Espada, always arrogant, always scheming, could not help but be moved. They, too, joined in the cheering. Tsk, tsk. Aizen, Captain, that's only while you're sealed. Imagine how much more powerful your Reiatsu will be once you break every restraint, Ichimaru Gin admitted without pretense. He had no regrets about failing to kill Aizen. Anyone who'd watched could see that once Aizen fully fused with the Hogyoku, his power would only keep growing. The Karakura Aizen had been terrifying, transcending both Shinigami and Menos Grande, but the Aizen in the recording, the one who could turn everything to ash with a laugh, was the Aizen Gin had always truly feared and watched for during his century of concealment. Aizen, Gin trailed off. Look, someone murmured. There's a crack in the canopy, where Kurohitsugi struck. Aizen glanced up with an indifferent half-smile. He paid no mind to the prison chair that had remained intact under the Kurohitsugi's bombardment. What held his attention was the canopy over the Seirete, the barrier that once separated Soul Society from the Soul King Palace. The camera kept rising toward it. So what? Ichimaru asked quietly. What are you thinking? Before the real-world Aizen could answer, the captains in the recorded footage supplied it. Everyone, there's no time to waste. Sufeng, Soifan, was the first to act. Bankai activated, she straightened and shouldered the colossal golden missile of Jakuho Raikkoben, aiming it at the shattered canopy. Those eyeball monsters have to be destroyed, she warned. We have to pierce the canopy and use Urahara's Senkaimon to reach the Soul King Palace. Buy every second you can. She didn't wait for anyone's approval. She was about to launch when Aizen cut her off coldly. Soifan, he said softly. You want to break the canopy and go through the Senkaimon to reach the Soul King Palace, yes? He smiled faintly. There's no need. I only need to strike it with my Reiatsu. The sky curtain will collapse on its own. After he spoke, none of them doubted him. They had just seen him crush the Soul King's flowing power. His tone carried an ease that was terrifying. When the captains objected, fearing Aizen's Reiatsu would damage the Senkaimon, his reply stunned everyone. You won't need to go to the Soul King Palace, he said. Don't trouble yourselves. Let me bring it down. What? The first division exploded. That Aizen, does he mean to knock down the Soul King Palace with his Reiatsu? That's absurd. Anger replaced the shock on their faces. They'd already decided, using Urahara's Senkaimon and pooling their strength was the way to save the erased Soul King. Aizen's boast of simply tearing the palace down with spiritual pressure felt like arrogant dismissal of all their plans. Kyoraku Shunsui, seeing the captain commander's blood pressure spike, stepped up as if to restore order. He turned to the man he believed understood Aizen best and asked something that weighed on everyone's mind. Mayuri, Captain, he said, eyes narrow. That prison chair Aizen's sitting on. Undoubtedly your handiwork. From the footage, can it really restrain him? What if he goes berserk? Can that chair absorb his Reiatsu completely, indefinitely? Is there any risk of it breaking? Mayuri Kurotsuchi's expression was a mix of pride and impatience. Why ask the obvious, he said. You doubt my research that much? If you don't believe me, just wait and see. He sneered and refused to explain further, leaving Shunsui's attempt to play the vice role floundering. In the footage, Aizen wasted no more words. He ignored the renewed objections and, in a single breath, released the same scale of Reiatsu he had when he discarded the Kurohitsugi. The pressure was heavy and dense, something the captains, now far below him in power, should never have been able to perceive directly. But Aizen intentionally held back some of the force, letting them feel the vast, boundless Reiatsu flowing through him. It washed over the room like a tangible thing. The captains felt it in their bones, felt how completely and effortlessly it could overwhelm them. Chapter 191, Section 191. At that moment, with the second impact of a terrifying surge of spiritual pressure, no less powerful than the Soul King's, the already shattered canopy, weakened from prolonged strain, was pierced by Aizen's Reiatsu like glass. Canopy fragments rained down. In the sunlight, they flashed brilliant silver white, and the video's clarity sharpened as never before. Thanks to the camera's angle, the strongest onlookers in the Soul Reaper world were finally able to glimpse the dark gap in the 72 layers of barrier on the horizon, the very breach Yhwach had forced open earlier. Aizen? He's not really planning to blow the Soul King Palace apart through that gap, is he? That thought had barely formed when the screen, which had just steadied, exploded once more with raw force. Kyoraku Shunsui's worst fear came true. When Aizen released his Reiatsu again, it was clearly stronger, and he projected it outward with far greater control. Kyoraku's earlier suspicion was confirmed. Aizen's state was growing more ferocious by the second. If he keeps powering up like this, the 72 layers of barriers will be pierced. The captain's faces drained. Especially Kyoraku, he could have bitten his tongue in frustration. If the Soul King Palace fell, everything would flip. Aizen would no longer be a savior, but the sinner who destroyed the world. At that moment, the entire Soul Reaper world stared at the screen, braced against the suffocating pressure of Aizen's Reiatsu, scarcely daring to breathe. And then, at the height of that tension, for reasons no one could initially explain, the Reiatsu pillar, which should have reached its apex, suddenly and rapidly weakened. In an instant, it contracted down to a single beam and then was drawn back into Aizen's body. The members of the Gotei 13 finally exhaled as one, relief flooding the Seirete. Everyone's eyes turned in gratitude toward Nemu Kurotsuchi. Captain Mayuri, thank you, they seemed to say. You saved the world this time. Grimjo, however, only snorted with displeasure. When the Reiatsu erupted from Aizen and surged above the canopy, its destructive force overwhelming even the soul-sealing membrane, he had trembled with excitement. As someone who craved power and spectacle, he'd been ready to enjoy Aizen's display. But before anyone could savor the moment, the assault collapsed. Grimjo's immediate thought, shared by many watching, was a profanity. I'm already half undressed and you cut it off now? Ichimaru Gin, too, looked disappointed. If they'd seen the Soul King Palace actually struck down, the entire Soul Reaper world would have been shaken to its core. He glanced toward the throne. Aizen made no move, but the narrowing of his eyes and the displeasure in his face were unmistakable. Aizen himself, having suddenly been interrupted, looked slightly bewildered on the screen. Kyoraku's footsteps came into frame. Under the brims of his hat, the sly glint in his one visible eye matched the smirk on his face. Turning to the cameras, and to Aizen, he calmly answered the question everyone had been asking. It's useless. Give it up, Aizen. You remember what you said yourself in hell, Kyoraku went on. Your spiritual pressure cannot be eliminated. It can only be bound to your body. Doesn't that mean the binding itself can be enormous? As he spoke, his gaze fell to Nemu Kurotsuchi, who was walking into view. The camera followed her, the sunflower-patterned outfit, the confident, almost arrogant expression as she faced Aizen. Aizen, not very pleased, are you? Nemu taunted, a sinister sneer curling her lips. You thought your power could outrun my technology, so you let loose all your Reiatsu? How naive, she continued. producing a circular controller from her pocket and deliberately dangling it before Aizen. The strength of the binding depends on me. As long as you wear the Bakudo device I made, forget about doing anything as ridiculous as striking down the Soul King Palace. Her words, amplified by the playback sound, spread through the entire Soul Reaper world and drew cheers across the Seirete. The Gotei 13 Shinigami exchanged grateful looks toward Nemu on the screen. Ever since Aizen had reappeared during the 1,000-year Blood War, the captains and their subordinates had been suffocated by his power. Even being forced to release him had been a humiliation. The thought that Aizen might actually bring down the Soul King Palace was intolerable. If it had happened, the Shinigami's prestige and the Seirete itself would have been ruined, despite Aizen's prior role as a savior. Aizen's expression shifted, subtle but real. Though he had remained composed even while faced with the Soul King's rising power, Nemu's intervention made him show clear emotion. He narrowed his eyes and regarded her with cold interest, the corner of his mouth lifted. "In that case," he said softly, "let's set the binding device to maximum. Let's see which is stronger, your technology or my power." It was a rare provocation, but the footage cut out as Aizen's voice faded. The screen went black. Many watching felt a pang of disappointment that they couldn't watch that challenge play out. Their regret didn't last long. The review resumed a moment later, another segment beginning with a crisp swish of motion. The first image that hit them was the ravaged Seirete, and a dark space-time gate tearing open out of nowhere, spinning like a vortex as it formed. What's happening? This Dangai gate, it came down from the Soul King Palace. Inside the first division, the captains had only just begun to catch their breath when their nerves tightened again. Every eye fixed on the dark gate, a chill crawling up their spines. The feeling was unmistakable. Once that gate opened, disaster would spill out. The other side, it can't be. Yhwach, is it? Someone in the crowd murmured the name, and what followed crushed the captains and the captain commander with utter despair. The gate yawned open with a thunderous boom. An evil figure, wrapped in black reiatsu, descended like a god of destruction, accompanied by a torrent of darkness. Footsteps sounded on the broadcast, and every captain's face froze in the same expression of wide-eyed terror. Yhwach! The name escaped them as if it drained the last of their strength. How could this be? How had he become like this? Yhwach no longer wore the familiar Quincy guise. He had transformed into something dark and chaotic, and the dozens of all-seeing eyes on his back made anyone who looked at him shiver down to their bones. An indescribable, crushing pressure surged outward. Even with the captain commander standing at the front, every Soul Reaper captain felt as if their right to breathe had been stolen. Their hearts seemed near to ceasing. This was only the aura of Yhwach in a Soul King-level form, standing perfectly still. It's terrifying. After devouring the Soul King, Yhwach's power has reached that level. Desperation washed over the captains. In an instant, the faint glimmer of hope that had returned when the Soul King's power waned was snuffed out by Yhwach's appearance. Just as everyone's fighting spirit was about to be ground into dust, another voice cut through, a voice that could shred fear like a blade at dawn and instantly dispel it. The camera swung to the other side, to where Yhwach stood. There sat the familiar white prison chair. Seated in it, hands folded and bearing the same calm, confident smirk, was Aizen. "Welcome to my soul society." The words rolled across the broadcast, the same boast that had shaken the Soul Reaper world before. The Gotei 13, already drowning in their bleakest moment, watched aghast as Aizen reappeared like a ghost from their worst memories. God damn it! It's him again! Is he trying to play savior once more? Seeing that white chair, that posture, that slight smile, the captains felt as if they were being forced to watch a replay of the torture they'd endured half an hour ago. But this time, Aizen would not be facing only a chaotic surge of Reiatsu. He faced Yhwach, now an entity equal to a new Soul King. This scene should have happened after the captains ascended to the Soul King Palace, right? It seems they failed. Jushiro Ukitake sighed, and with a weary hand, touched the mark on his back where the god's oracle had activated, the same all-seeing eye symbol as Yhwach's. The recap hadn't yet shown what had happened in the Soul King's chamber, so the moments around the Soul King's death remained unknown. But as a believer in the one-eyed great god, Ukitake had expected to sacrifice his body at the right moment, to become the Soul King's right arm and stabilize the three realms by replacing the dead Soul King. Now, seeing Yhwach already risen to Soul King level, his heart broke. Even the Soul King's right arm would likely be powerless. It might already have been devoured by Yhwach. If that was so, then Yhwach truly stood alone at the pinnacle of power. No one could match him. If I had known this 1,000 years ago, I would have burned him to ash, whatever the cost. The Captain Commander's face had gone dark and purple. His usually drooping eyelids were forced wide, his cloudy eyes filled with despair. He understood better than anyone that the title he'd been known by for a millennium, the strongest Shinigami, no longer meant anything against Soul King level power. The Shinigami pinnacle could not contend with that. What worries me more, Nemukurotsuchi said quietly, is that Yhwach, with his all-knowing and all-powerful abilities, now as the new Soul King, might be able to look into us watching this replay. Her words tightened the air in the captain's office until every hair stood on end. The thought of a future Soul King peering back into the present was a terror beyond imagining. Could this recap be something he created to drag us into despair before the blood war even begins? Zaraki Kenpachi growled, a rare flash of insight creasing his brow. From the start, the transparent screens had appeared inexplicably across the Soul Reaper world and could not be shut down. Only Soul King level power could have done that, and Yhwach, with his all-knowing might, had already been revealed to possess such abilities during the Hashwalth recap. Put it all together, and the possibility that Yhwach engineered this spectacle to demoralize them could not be dismissed. As dread spread through the captains, the broadcast moved on. On the screen, the conversation between Aizen and Yhwach began. Aizen Sosuke. I never thought I'd meet you again in a place like this. A grin cut across the darkness-shrouded face of Yhwach. Unlike their first meeting in Hell, he no longer spoke to Aizen as an equal. Now he was oppressive, arrogant. Heh, with your omniscience and omnipotence, you must have seen this coming, right? Aizen sat bound to the prisoner's chair. Despite the uneven posture, a faint smile played at his lips. He showed no change in expression as the destructive black currents around Yhwach swirled and tightened. His calm only made the despair of the Shinigami captains watching the scene that much more pronounced. Humph, Yhwach continued. When you were in Hell, you lost your last chance. Even if we both watch the Soul Society march toward ruin, there will be no cooperation between us. Because the difference between our powers is like heaven and earth. He spread his hands. The Black Soul King power surged outward, forming a dark vortex that reduced everything it swallowed to ash. The spiritual pressure swept across the Soul Society with an intensity nothing there could withstand, not even Nemukurotsuchi's proud creation, Aizen's prisoner's chair. The chair exploded in an instant. Stone and dust were scattered and then swallowed by the encroaching void, annihilated before they could even touch the ground. Aizen, he's free! They had just cursed him, and yet when Aizen's figure stepped out of the dissipating darkness, unharmed, the Soul Reaper captains couldn't help but be moved. Hope, as if instinctively, returned to those who had once loathed him. Aizen emerged completely from the black, looked Yhwach in the eye from equal height, and spoke with that cool arrogance of his. Cooperation? He shook his head once, dismissively. A faint curve lifted his lips. I believe I already said it once in Hell. I cannot bear to see the Quincy King trailing after a Shinigami, so there is no possibility of cooperation at all. A new, transcendent spiritual pressure erupted from Aizen, meeting Yhwach's darkness. The two forces clashed, and for a moment the encroaching blackness stalled. When it receded, Aizen bowed his head slightly, a hidden smile in his tone. Also, thank you, he said. Thanks for destroying that annoying chair for me. A chill of killing intent flashed across his lowered eyelids. Confidence dripped from his voice. Now, I can finally go all out. In Urahara's shop, the crowd watching the feed felt that clash like a living thing. The two spiritual currents colliding were terrifying, possibly the most intense confrontation of spiritual power the Shinigami world had ever witnessed. Even those who had steeled themselves were shaken to their cores by what they saw on the screen. If Aizen and Yhwach's powers hadn't canceled each other out there, No one could have watched from so close. Proximity to a fully manifested current like that would shred a soul. This was Soul King level power, the power of creation itself. Looks like first place on the power rankings belongs to Yhwach, Urahara murmured, his expression unreadable. It was what they'd suspected. Seeing it unfold on the screen now, seeing how Yhwach had grown stronger from his earlier fights, how he used a substitute to trick Zanka no Tachi's Bankai, how he ascended to the Soul King Palace and activated the Auswellen to absorb power, and finally, how he became a new Soul King after devouring the original, made it undeniable. Even if the timeline had shifted, knowing such a final enemy existed left a bitter taste. The suffocating atmosphere in the shop was proof enough. Still, Yorichi said, arms crossed, glancing meaningfully at Ichigo. Aizen isn't at a disadvantage. It's not all hopeless. She smiled slyly and added, besides, first and third place are facing off. If our Ichigo, second place, doesn't show up for a scene like this, his ranking won't look convincing. Her raised eyebrow and playful tone cut through the tension. Isshin went silent for a beat, then, ignoring his still raw injuries, thumped himself down next to Ichigo. He clapped a big hand on his son's shoulder and grinned like a proud father. Yorichi's right, Isshin said loudly. There's no rule that says the world can only have one savior. Ichigo, your old man wants to see you step in. The warmth of the father-son moment eased the oppressive air in the shop. Ichigo didn't flinch. His eyes were steady as he spoke. I have a strong feeling my future self will intervene in this final battle, he said. After all, only I can be immune to Kyoka Suigetsu's hypnosis. The room went still. Those few words, spoken without pretense, hit everyone like a physical blow. Ichigo, what did you just say? Urahara's eyes went wide. You mean even when faced with a Soul King level Yhwach, Kyoka Suigetsu worked on him? A cold chill ran down Urahara's spine. If Kyoka Suigetsu could affect someone at that level, the Zanpakuto's hypnosis had reached an unimaginable scale. Ichigo nodded plainly. That's right. I felt it again. Even in a battlefield torn by clashing spiritual forces, that subtle fluctuation, the hallmark of an illusionary world, was there. A low gasp rippled through the room. Ichigo alone had the immunity to 5 sense hypnosis. If he could be so certain, then it was confirmed. Soul King Yhwach had been caught in an illusion. Chapter 194, Section 194. Urahara Kisuke was thoroughly convinced. He gave a sincere thumbs up toward the video of Aizen, who remained expressionless from start to finish even while surrounded by darkness. Aizen, you're something else, he said. Even if you can't keep up hypnosis for long, that's incredible. In the footage, the clash of spiritual pressure between the two villains had finally ended. Seirete lay in ruins beneath them. Yhwach stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his body wreathed in dark power, looking unchanged, if anything, more ferocious. Aizen, for his part, had only some dust on his white prison uniform. His aura remained at full strength, showing no sign of weakening. The two were evenly matched. Aizen, Yhwach began. I thought you'd settle this at the Soul King Palace, but you failed to kill Kurosaki Ichigo, Aizen said, the faint curve of his lips mocking Yhwach's failure. Aizen's taunt had no effect. Yhwach ignored it and asked coldly, Aizen, what is your purpose in stopping me? For the Soul Society? A contemptuous sneer colored his voice. I don't see how that would benefit you. Benefit? Aizen shook his head minutely, a playful low voice replying, I act to destroy anything that tries to dominate me. That was your reason for fighting me, Yhwach said. That's all, Aizen finished. Inside the First Division, Zaraki Kenpachi, who had before been itching to cut Aizen down, couldn't help but praise him. I have to admit, Aizen is really tough, he said, carrying his Zanpakuto. Even alone, in such a destructive mess, his aura stays undiminished. Aizen is a true man, someone else added. Seeing Aizen hold his own during the 1,000-year blood war made Kenpachi reconsider what he thought he knew. Aizen had always coveted the Soul King Palace. Kenpachi had assumed it was ambition for domination. But Aizen's words had revealed a different motive. He struck only against those who sought to dominate him. That didn't make him brutish. Yhwach, on the other hand, was the indiscriminate killer trying to uproot everything. It stings admitting it, but he's brave, Kenpachi said. Kuchiki Byakuya, pride-dented but realistic, conceded as well. If he hadn't intervened twice at the critical moments, the situation would have been much worse. Perhaps there would have been no turning the tide. The image of Aizen cutting them down was still vivid in every captain's memory. It was hard to reconcile those memories with the footage of him acting in ways that preserved the only real chance for victory. They were conflicted. Then the captain commander, who had been silent, slammed his wooden staff on the ground. "There is no need for inner turmoil, no need to hesitate," he said calmly. "We must keep watching. Everything will become clear." There was no anger in him now, no clinging to past grudges. Having witnessed a battle at the Soul King level, his perspective had widened beyond the burdens of old titles and pride. He seemed resolved to let the facts speak for themselves. As the exchange between the two villains drew to a close, and Yhwach moved in as if to deliver a final strike, the air behind him tore open with the sound of a garganta ripping. Two figures shot out from the spatial rift, each swinging their zanpakuto at Yhwach's back. "Kurosaki Ichigo," everyone heard and registered without surprise. This was the final battle, and Ichigo, ranked second on the list, could hardly be absent. But the second figure was something else entirely. "Abarai! Renji?" The captains were dumbfounded in unison. They turned, faces registering disbelief as they took in Renji Abarai standing there, stunned, and just behind Kuchiki Byakuya. What was he doing here? A vice captain, with a simple, unremarkable zanpakuto that extended and retracted like a dragonfly cleaver, didn't exactly fit the profile for an end-of-world confrontation. He wasn't famed for exceptional power or a grand pedigree. Where had he gotten the right to show up? The atmosphere shifted, suspicion and irritation flaring. The captains remembered the future they'd seen, of one captain after another falling, of even century-old captains and vizard reduced to mere punching bags. Now a spiky-haired redhead with an ordinary background was here too. Did he have something hidden? Did he possess a hogyoku? Nemu Kurotsuchi stepped forward with a long stride directly in front of Renji. She scrutinized him greedily, her eyes raking him up and down. With an insinuating tilt to her voice, she demanded, "Where did you come from? Have you been hiding a hogyoku inside you?" Abarai Vice Captain. "After Aizen's inventory is complete, would you mind coming with me to the Technology Development Bureau? I think more than any other research. Your body seems to hold a secret that could dramatically increase the strength of all Shinigami in a short period. If it weren't for Kuchiki Byakuya's intervention, Nemu Kurotsuchi would have pulled out a scalpel and started dissecting him on the spot for research. What kind of cheat code was this? How could Abarai Renji, in less than 3 years, go from an unknown vice captain to someone who could stand up to Yhwach? Not even the Hogyoku should be that effective. But the captains hadn't expected any of this. It was only the beginning. Even more shocking things were about to unfold. Holy crap. Abarai Vice Captain, he's even bolder than Aizen. He actually dares to engage Yhwach in close-quarters combat. Watching Renji alone, sword in hand, launching an attack from the side, the captains were stunned. And then he shouted his Bankai release command. That stunned everyone even more. "Sozabimaru!" The sound of the release filled Renji's head. For a moment his mind went blank. In his memory flashed the thought, in the future, I don't just awaken Bankai. My Bankai looks pretty awesome too. When he activated Bankai, Renji's appearance changed dramatically. A layer of light combat armor wrapped his neck and shoulders over his Shinigami uniform, giving him an imposing silhouette. Oh, he's gotten a lot stronger with Bankai. The captains narrowed their eyes, suppressing doubts and watching with renewed anticipation. But that composure lasted less than 3 seconds. Renji's Zanpakuto hadn't even reached Yhwach when, bang! A sound like heavy fabric tearing split the air, then a spray of blood. Renji's left arm was cleaved off in midair. The first division fell silent. The captains were rendered speechless. They had expected a heroic strike. The footage had even given Renji a close-up at the moment he attacked, clearly set up to showcase his courage, and instead, he'd been cut down before his blade could even touch anything. He'd struck nothing but air. The captain's excitement soured into embarrassment and disappointment in a matter of seconds. Please, at this level, stay out of the way and give the camera back to the real heroes. Renji himself swore under his breath. Damn it, that damn footage. If they needed a minor character to show Yhwach's power, the Gotei 13 had almost 6,000 members. They could have grabbed anyone, even a Vizard. They're the best at getting beaten up. Why did it have to be me? How would he face anyone in the Seirete after this? He wanted to crawl into a hole and die under the captain's incredulous stares. The tense, awkward silence broke at the next moment. Spare me. A tide of dark spiritual pressure washed over the scene. Yhwach didn't even look back as a strand of power severed Renji's arm. Casual, effortless. Bankai mean nothing to me, Yhwach taunted. All Bankai have already been broken by me in the future. Within that swirl of black Reiatsu, Yhwach's broad arm moved to finish Renji. It looked as if Renji was done for. Then, at the most astonishing instant, what's happening? Is that Aizen? Terrified murmurs echoed throughout Seirete, swelling into a roar. Because Kurosaki Ichigo wasn't present in the first division, the captains had no prior knowledge that Yhwach had been hypnotized. Their shock was therefore far greater than that of lower-ranking Shinigami and seated officers. That's impossible. Yhwach, he's a Soul King-level being with omniscient and omnipotent sight of past and future. Can he really be hypnotized? To the captains, the combination of omniscience and Soul King-level Reiatsu made Yhwach an invincible force. None of them ever imagined he could fall victim to Kyoka Suigetsu. The revelation upended everything they thought they knew. Even more unexpected was Yhwach's exasperated taunt aimed at Aizen. Aizen, are you deliberately protecting Abarai Renji? Uniting against a common enemy. Isn't that the malice you always despised, the sort only losers possess? You've really sunk low. The camera cut to Aizen's face, handsome, aloof, a faint, disdainful curl at the edge of his mouth. Even under public ridicule from Yhwach, Aizen didn't deny either fact, that he had wanted to protect someone and that he had united himself with members of the Gotei 13. That alone left the captains dumbfounded. Aizen protecting anyone? Shock and disbelief rippled among them. In their minds, Aizen was dangerous and untrusting, someone who would hardly ever act to protect others. If it weren't for the subsequent clips that followed, revealing even more, they never would have believed what they were seeing. Chapter 196, Section 1196. The Soul Reaper captains had long suspected Aizen's heart was made of cold stone, utterly devoid of human feeling. But who would have thought? This day would come. Aizen was suddenly prioritizing teamwork. Worse yet, one of his partners was from the Gotei 13, and the other was Kurosaki Ichigo, who had just brutally beaten Aizen in the previous encounter. Thinking of that, the captains couldn't help but wonder if they had fundamentally misunderstood Aizen. Could there even be a chance that Aizen might be redeemed? Chapter 182, Aizen's Ultimate Technique. 5 Dragons of Destruction. It wasn't only the Gotei 13 who were stunned. Inside Las Noches, the Arrancar's expressions were just as grim. The difference was clear. Although the captains had been deceived by Aizen and failed to prevent his defection to the Soul Society, that incident had passed, and the Karakura town battle existed only in footage. Agonizing, humiliating, but ultimately not a direct threat to their lives. It had been spiritual torment and wounded pride, nothing more. In Las Noches, however, Jin Ichimaru's rebellion, fanned by Baragan, had been real and recent. Every Arrancar present had felt Aizen's merciless decisiveness. To those who tried to harm him, Aizen showed not only an unassailable side, but repaid his enemies in full. On the raised platform beside the throne lay the remains of the Skull Emperor and his fraction, reduced to grayish-white bone ash, the residue of Baragan's power, and at the same time, a deliberate warning left by Aizen. It was meant to admonish the Arrancars. Anyone, Espada or Fraction, who rebelled further would share the Skull Emperor's fate. Facing that razor's edge situation, seeing Aizen now make a series of strange, incomprehensible moves in the final battle shocked the Arrancar even more than it did the Shinigami. At the blood-stained base of the throne, Gin Ichimaru, still bound by spiritual chains, kept up his usual flippant, teasing tone, but inside he was shaken. A subtle, dangerous idea flickered through his thoughts. If even Aizen and Ichigo could shake hands and fight together, could he and Aizen return to what they were before? From the exposed footage, it was clear Yhwach was the greatest threat. Compared to the destruction of the Soul Society, the wisp of soul taken from Rangiku was nothing. Still, this was only Gin's private, passing thought. Nothing meant to imply Aizen felt the same. Aizen, perched on his throne, stayed silent and composed, his face unreadable. It was impossible to guess what went through that cold, inscrutable mind. In the video, after deceiving Yhwach with an illusion and facing the Quincy King's taunts, Aizen simply smiled, landed with composure, and unleashed a decisive counterattack. Hado 99, 5 Dragons of Destruction. He raised his hand. His eyes were sharp as blades. The camera closed in on him, but he offered no words, only the full release of the spiritual pressure in his body. The sound that followed was deafening, like the thunder of the world's birth. Dark purple spiritual energy surged, whipping up vast whirlwinds and gusts that stirred dust into the air and shaped it into immense, sky-soaring dragon-shaped blasts of Reiatsu. Mountains crumbled and the ground split. As those 5 dragon-formed energies rose, the scarred earth of Seirete, already weakened by countless ruptures, was torn apart and collapsed entirely. It's over. Seirete has fallen. Will the Gotei 13's 1,000-year-old barracks be nothing but a dream? In the real world, wails echoed across Seirete. The purple celestial dragons coiled and tore through building after building. Division headquarters collapsed and landmarks vanished. Once again, the Gotei 13 suffered a spiritual blow and a fresh awe of godlike power. This is terrifying, truly worthy of a Hado 99. In both aura and destructive force, it's far stronger than Kurohitsugi. In the first division, the captains watched the purple current swirl and the row upon row of dragon scales unfurling across the sky. Their breathing caught. The scales looked almost alive. A single fragment of one contained energy comparable to a lower-ranking captain's total Reiatsu. 5 such manifestations had erupted across Seirete, an area of effect attack that could wipe the place clean. Even if the captains joined forces, they would likely be overwhelmed. So, this is Aizen at his peak. That Aizen who reversed with the Hogyoku was far less oppressive. They sighed from their hearts. During the Karakura fight, watching Aizen and Ichigo, the captains had felt fear, but never true despair. Aizen's hollow-like form had only provoked their pride and fighting spirit. Now, merely watching the footage had them trembling inside. They were oddly grateful the ranking footage had been exposed. Otherwise, no one at captain level would have been able to witness this spectacle firsthand. Look, the dark tide on the battlefield is nowhere near as strong. It must be suppressed by the dragon-shaped pressure. Someone pointed it out first, and the others confirmed it. The tide-like dark surge had indeed retreated in a large area. Without the all-encompassing darkness, Yhwach's oppressive aura was less overwhelming. Because of Aizen's ultimate technique, a sliver of hope had emerged. Aizen, can he use this to finish Yhwach in one blow? The captains stared at the screen, fixated on that single outcome. It was the only answer they wanted right then. Chapter 183, New Ranking, Unveiling Kurosaki Ichigo. Chapter 197, Section 197, damn it! Aizen Sosuke, that bastard! He actually threatens His Majesty's safety. Inside Silver Frame City, hundreds of pure-blooded Quincies stared at the screen with faces drained of color. The footage was impossible to comprehend. As the camera kept zooming out, Aizen and Yhwach shrank farther and farther, until they were nothing more than black dots. Their features were indistinguishable. And yet, even at that distance, the dragon-shaped spiritual pressure filled the frame with a monstrous presence. The enormous, soaring form of purple Reiatsu nearly overflowed the screen, bearing down on them with a heaviness that made the air taste like lead. Every pure-blooded Quincy felt the weight of it in their bones, as if they were being suffocated by the footage itself. Inside the Ice Crystal Palace, the air stood frozen. Only the soft rhythm of breathing broke the silence. Earlier, when the 4 members of Squad Zero and Hashwalth had been revealed on the review list, the pure-blooded Quincies had celebrated with champagne and jubilation. Now the mood had swung the other way. Shock and despair etched into every face. Aizen Sosuke, someone whispered. He is one of the 5 special war powers. His Reiatsu is inscrutable, another murmured. Hashwalth, standing at the pinnacle of the palace, finally let his expression crack. The usual ice-cold detachment fell away, and something like grief showed in his eyes. He had been granted a portion of Yhwach's power, the strange, terrible gift that let him see and alter the future. Even with that advantage, watching what the video showed had unsettled him more than anything he had seen before. The five dragons' annihilation. The scale of that destructive force was beyond imagining. If he had been on that battlefield, he told himself, he might not have survived a single blast from one of those dragon-shaped pressures. If Hashwalth, who had felt the flow of future knowledge, was shaken, what of the others? The pure-blooded Quinchis, haughty, proud, and contemptuous of the Shinigami, sat stunned, subdued by what Aizen had done. There was no denying it. Aizen Sosuke ranked third on the list. He was devastatingly powerful. As Aizen raised his hand in the footage, 5 dragon-shaped columns of purple Reiatsu roared into being, ripping through clouds and lightning. They converged on Yhwach. The moment Yhwach's form was swallowed by the assault, the video slowed. Hashwalth's face went pale. "Everyone, get down!" he shouted. He acted without ceremony, propping up his shield of atonement and throwing himself flat. He lowered his center of gravity as far as possible, ready to withstand the shockwave that might level the palace. Others scrambled to follow, but there was hardly time. Boom. The explosion was like a trans-dimensional sonic blast, a cry that connected future and present. Purple sound waves and thunderclaps hurled outward, shredding the light screen and sweeping through the ice crystal palace. The crystal floor, once polished and gleaming, turned to rubble in seconds. Fragments of shattered stone flew like hail, slicing faces and arms, leaving streaks of blood everywhere. The air, once rich with pure reishi, filled with the copper tang of blood and the nauseating stench of destruction. Silver Frame City lay in ruins. Even though they were mere observers in the present, watching a recording, the pure-blooded Quincy's felt as if the catastrophe were raining down upon them. And to their fury, it had been caused by a single technique Aizen launched without incantation, and from a future separated from their present. Then, under the stunned eyes of every spectator, the footage blacked out. The light screen went dark. The review of Aizen was over. The round had ended. "It's unreal," Urahara Kisuke breathed in the human world, wiping milk and splinters from his jacket. He and the others had been watching the same feed. The explosion's virtual shockwave had shattered every shelf in his general store. Goods lay scattered in ruins. Hot milk had splashed his face. He looked as if he'd been pulled through a trash heap. "Ha, shopkeeper, you reacted too slowly," Tsukubishi Tessai taunted from behind him. He, Yoriichi, and Ichigo had taken cover behind a broken Kido barrier and come through the simulated blast unscathed, clothes neat and undamaged, a sharp contrast to Urahara's bedraggled state. "Chich, Tessai, stop being smug," Urahara grumbled, brushing dirt from his coat. "Everyone watched the video. When it's time to clean up, don't think you can slack off." "Heh, Kisuke, you worry too much," Yoriichi purred, rolling her eyes. As they bickered, the blackened screen brightened again with a rush of static. Anticipation flared among them. "The next review round is starting already?" someone said. Their surprise was tempered by curiosity. This time the protagonist would be Kurosaki Ichigo. When the image stabilized, new subtitles appeared at the center of the screen. Chapter 198, Section 198, second place on the combat power ranking. New inventory. Unveiling Kurosaki Ichigo. P.S. Aizen's inventory has concluded, from Dead Aizen to Collapsing Aizen, and finally to Blood Aizen. Each form, with its distinct temperament, personality, abilities, and attacks, was exposed in full, a fitting finale. Next up, Ichigo's overpowered life. Chapter 184, Is My Zanpaku to Watch? Kurosaki Ichigo, the subtitles announced. The powerhouses of the Soul Society had braced themselves. They weren't as shocked as they had been with previous inventories. Instead, curiosity filled the air. Ever since the decisive battle in Karakura Town, when Ichigo first appeared as a savior and hammered Aizen, anticipation had been growing. Aizen's revelations had shown Ichigo to be a chosen one in this world, the only person fusing Shinigami, Hollow, and Quincy powers. And that made everyone hungry to see how he'd grown. In just 3 years, he had gone from a normal high school student in the human world to a top-tier fighter who ultimately faced Yhwach, the Soul King. That extreme trajectory and the mixed powers, not to mention the still unrevealed Fullbring power, made Ichigo a walking legend. Everyone watching hoped to glean insight from his journey. The inventory video moved on. The subtitles blinked away, and the scene shifted to a bright, oddly airy space. It looked like a huge underground chamber with an artificial sky and rolling green hills. As the camera crawled forward, it revealed a steaming hot spring tucked into the landscape. Kisuke Urahara, watching through the transparent screen in his shop, went pale. No way. He stared at the video, then looked down at his feet in disbelief. Isn't this the shop's secret room? Ichigo, standing beside him, followed his gaze and stamped his foot a few times. You've got to be kidding. Urahara, your rundown shop has a giant basement with a hot spring? Why didn't you say so earlier? Beating Aizen while soaking in hot water sounds a lot better than standing around. Urahara didn't answer right away. He pointed at the screen until Ichigo stopped staring at his shoes, then spoke with calm authority. You're thinking too small, Ichigo. It isn't as leisurely as you imagine. This scene is very likely showing your experience while training here in the future. The footage seemed to confirm him. The camera slowed and lingered on the figures gathered in the basement. Ichigo squinted. Every face was familiar. Aside from his father and Yorichi, nearly everyone was present, including a future version of himself in casual clothes. Ichigo felt his heart lurch. Is this the start? My Shinigami path. It's finally going to be revealed. The video continued, showing Urahara pushing Ichigo's spirit body out and explaining the concepts of soul sleep and soul chain, then going through the training steps to adapt to the soul state, including the brutal moment when Ichigo's chain of fate was severed by an axe. Then the camera cut to something else entirely, a bizarre, inverted dimension of towering buildings, drained of color and life. Streets were empty, windows were dark. For a moment, Ichigo's eyes widened in recognition, though he'd never seen this place before. It felt like he had been there countless times. His inner soul thrummed with subtle resonance. This has to be my soul space, Ichigo breathed. Right, congratulations, you're correct, Ichigo, Urahara said with a small, wry smile, flicking his folding fan and pointing at Ichigo's chest. Surprised? To be honest, I didn't expect your soul space to be so strange. It's eerie, even terrifying. Urahara frowned at the colorless skyline, a tightness in his expression. Isshin Kurosaki, looking on, sighed and half blamed himself for the unusual arrangement. The lifeless, gloomy scene alone was unsettling. Could it be related to the mixture of the three powers inside Ichigo? Before anyone could say more, a deep, hollow voice cut through the audio of the inventory. Can you hear me, Ichigo? The voice arrived without warning. On the screen, every face froze. For a heartbeat, everyone watching, Ichigo included, trembled as if struck. Then they reacted in unison. Holy! Did I hear that right? That voice? Yhwach's voice? It wasn't just the handful of people in Urahara's shop. Across the Soul Society, among Shinigami, Arrancar, and pureblood Quincy alike, everyone recognized that tone. As the camera rotated and followed Ichigo's gaze, the image settled on the other side of the hollow cityscape. Standing there was a tall, black-cloaked figure. The dark red cloak and the weathered face that resembled Yhwach sent a shock through the broadcast. Screams erupted across the Soul Society, shaking the heavens. This can't be real. How is this possible? Kurosaki Ichigo's Zanpakuto. Is it Yhwach? The camera finally stopped. Section 199. It finally materialized directly across from Ichigo. In the distance, a dark red hooded cloak billowed like a bloody vortex, wrapping Yhwach's tall figure. Apart from being 90% the same, his weathered face wore pale sunglasses, long messy bangs shadowing his eyes. He floated with his hands clasped behind his back, laying down a trump card at the very beginning. The revelation ignited the entire Soul Reaper world. Holy! Ichigo, my son! This can't be real. Kurosaki Isshin stared at the frozen image, his eyes bulging in disbelief. He stayed silent for several long heartbeats before managing a single ragged word. 990. It took him that long to recover enough to turn a shaking head toward Ichigo. His face went ashen. Ichigo. It's not that your old man's imagination runs wild, but who in the world would have thought Yhwach was hiding inside your soul space? This is crazier than Aizen becoming a Menos Grande. Isshin was utterly stunned. He scrutinized Ichigo as if he were seeing a monster, eyes flicking over him 100 times. His horror only deepened. He grew paler by the second. I thought the trifusion of Shinigami, Menos Grande, and Quincy bloodlines was already the ultimate cheat, Yorichi murmured, looking at Ichigo with a complicated expression. But now you've got Yhwach inside you too? Even the legendary, world-defining powers of the three races weren't enough for Ichigo. Apparently, he also had to inherit someone who knew and could do everything. It was ridiculous, infuriating, and borderline obscene. Ichigo himself stood frozen, every feature glued into place. His mind reeled. Half an hour ago, he'd been fighting Yhwach with his Zanpakuto in that final clash. Now the man was inside him? Ichigo patted at himself, frantic, trying to find where it had gone wrong. If someone had come up and said, "Hey, here's a free Yhwach. Keep him in your body and let him cause trouble whenever he likes," anyone would have slapped them. This was not the kind of help anyone wanted. The review had cut off right as Aizen's segment finished and the final battle began. Had everyone together killed Yhwach in the end? Had they been overwhelmed and devoured by the darkness? No one knew. Old questions remained unanswered, and now a new, huge problem had appeared. Ichigo felt a splitting headache coming on. On the screen, the footage of Ichigo and Watch continued. "Who exactly are you?" Ichigo demanded, turning with a wary glare. The Ichigo in the footage, like the one now, was astonished by this suddenly appearing unfamiliar middle-aged man. "Who am I?" the man replied. The close-up caught sharp eyes beneath the bangs. "What are you talking about? It's me." He lowered his gaze like a predator sizing up prey, as if intent on calling Ichigo by name. But just as he tried to say it, something forced him silent. He couldn't speak the name of his Zanpakuto. In the real world, whether Yhwach spoke his name or not hardly mattered. The captains watching needed no introduction. "What a show-off," spat one of the First Division captains. "Trying to be mysterious. Everyone knows that's Yhwach." Seeing that unmistakably evil face turned the captain's shock into white-hot anger. Memories of the 1,000-year blood war resurfaced, the countless lives lost fighting the pure-blood Quincy, the Seirete reduced to ruins. Fury flared in the captain's eyes. The air in the room crackled with it. "Captain Commander, what is this?" Kyoraku Shunsui asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The captain commander's pale, willow-like brows drooped as a rare flicker of pride crossed his features. 1,000 years ago, the Yhwach who began the blood war and was finally slain by Zanka no Tachi looked exactly like this. His words stunned everyone into silence. "Ah? Yhwach from 1,000 years ago?" the captains murmured, dumbfounded. If it truly was the Yhwach of 1,000 years past, perhaps before he possessed the all-knowing and all-powerful ability, then how could he be Ichigo's Zanpakuto now? Could their bond have started a millennium ago? If that were true, the implication was staggering. Ichigo, it seemed, was even more of a chosen one than anyone had imagined. At that moment, the review footage continued to play. The conversation between Kurosaki Ichigo and Yhwach went on as if the outside world didn't exist. "So that's how it is." Yhwach's voice was smooth, wrapped in that blood-red cloak. The face beneath it, the stubbled, ancient face of the man from 1,000 years ago, stared down. "Even now, can you still not hear my name? How pathetic." Because Aizen had already aired his inventory, the viewers in the real world were primed to dislike Yhwach. One look, and they were ready to assume the worst, especially Ichigo himself. "Pathetic? Stop talking rubbish," Ichigo snapped. "Knowing that you are my Zanpakuto is the most pathetic thing, isn't it?" Yhwach countered, and Ichigo went from defiant to deflated in the space of a heartbeat, gritting his teeth. "Ichigo, even as my Zanpakuto, you're still as arrogant and scheming as ever. You deserve to be punched." Tasai ground his fists together, as if he could reach out and smash the screen. Aizen's inventory had exposed the cruel, tyrannical side of the Soul King Yhwach without restraint. The audience's bias had already been shaped. Anything Yhwach said now felt like an attempt at self-justification. No one was letting him off the hook. Yhwach stood in the air, looking down at Ichigo with that imperious air, speaking with a self-satisfaction that made people everywhere bristle. "Don't try to whitewash yourself just because you claim to be Ichigo's Zanpakuto," they thought. "No way." Then Yhwach spoke again, and the words twisted the viewer's expressions into something stranger. "Ichigo, how many times must I repeat it before you can hear my name? I want to say, in this world, no one understands me better than you." When that softer, almost plaintive tone came from the screen, Ichigo's disgusted retort cut through without hesitation from inside the shop. Nonsense. I literally held my Zanpakuto and chased you from the Soul King Palace to the Seirete, hoping to cut you down with a single strike. Of course I understand you the most. Ichigo laughed in anger. Did Yhwach really think he could treat him like a fool? And why? Why was the idea of being the vessel for Yhwach's name so wrong? Ichigo had built up expectations. After Aizen's inventory, after his father, Yorichi, and Urahara had explained things, he'd filled in the blanks quickly. Zanpakuto were born from a Soul Reaper's own soul as a reflection, a partner. Knowing a Zanpakuto's name and speaking with it unlocked power. That was common sense, certified by countless Soul Reapers. So what had gone wrong? Ichigo had always pictured a Zanpakuto's spirit as a warm, sunny, big brother type, someone like him. How did that idea end up producing the evil Quincy King, Yhwach? And then there was the very public, very awkward prospect of battle etiquette. Every instance the viewers had seen, from captains down to lieutenants and grunts, showed that part of releasing a Zanpakuto involved shouting its name. It was part theatrics, part rhythm. The shout raised the momentum and the aura. It was essential. Even the captain commander couldn't skip it. As soon as Ichigo imagined himself on the battlefield, sword out, having to bellow, "Release, my Yhwach!" He clutched his chest and retched blood at the thought. "Please, video creator, no more. I don't want to see anything else," Ichigo begged, mortified. The footage sped up. At 8 times normal speed, it showed Ichigo, pulled along by Yhwach's coaxing, searching among the crevices of towering soul space buildings for the real Zanpakuto. Then that sequence ended. Ichigo regained consciousness just as the chains of fate were about to vanish. His white hollow mask made no one gasp. Hollow white had already been exposed during Aizen's inventory. But then came the basement. Urahara, blunt and aggressive, forced Ichigo to call the Zanpakuto's name, chasing him through the subterranean maze. He slashed through the already broken hilt that remained, and everyone watching in the shop, Ichigo included, suddenly brightened. "The blade's gone," someone breathed. If even the hilt's shattered, wouldn't Yhwach's soul have been cut to pieces with it, they hoped. Ichigo was just beginning his path as a Soul Reaper. If this method could eliminate the evil Quincy King's remnant soul, it would be a massive relief. But it didn't happen the way they expected. Under Yhwach's insistent calls, Ichigo finally shouted his Zanpakuto's name, Zangetsu. The name sounded right, strong, dignified. And yet it didn't fit the identity of a Quincy King at all. For many, it felt almost insulting to Yhwach's menace. Everyone in the shop leaned forward, eyes glued to the screen, waiting to see what that name meant, how the Quincy King would react. Inside Las Noches,